What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TTB Ravens Media. I apologize I wasn't able to get a video out yesterday. I probably still sound pretty bad, but yesterday I sounded really bad, and I couldn't really get through maybe even a minute of talking without coughing my guts out. So hopefully we're able to get through this entire video. Make sure to let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on the Ravens news that kind of dropped this weekend, which I'm not surprised by. Darius Slay news came out because he was on like a podcast or in an interview or something like that. And they asked him about the Ravens. How close were they? And he describes the situation. And he agreed to a deal with the Ravens, but he told them, he's like, I want to give the Eagles a chance to match it because he wanted to stay with the Eagles, and the Eagles had given up on him, and he gives them a chance to match it, and then they decided to match it. But there's this idea out there that the Ravens don't spend in free agency and the Ravens don't pursue these big names. That's not true. That is a myth. That is a fantasy. That is something that is not true. Something that would be more correct is the Ravens don't sign big name players in the offseason. That is something that I think is fair. They typically extend their own players. They don't go out and bring in these crazy superstars, but they try. They consistently try, but they're not stupid about it. Because how often do you see, wow, this guy just signed for a crazy contract, and then everyone goes, wow, yeah, but he was the best player in the market. And then you look at him 2 years later, like, man, that contract overpaid, i.e. Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson, these names that Ravens fans have been crying out to the Ravens to sign. Right? Please go after this guy. And then the Ravens are like, yeah, we reached out to him. We talked to him. We didn't really want to get a deal done. But then at the same time, whenever the Ravens seem to have made contract offers to players that end up saying, you know what, we're going to go with another team. But the Ravens made the offer and the numbers are out there of what they offered. They seem to play very well. And I think this is something that Eric DeCosta gets criticized for when there's nothing in reality that he can do. He gives them fair deals. The best thing you can do as a general manager is give them an offer and hope they sign with you. Obviously, you want to sell them on signing with you, but at some points, they may not want to do that. Last year, it was Juju. Juju Smith-Schuster, the Ravens pursued heavily. They gave him a better offer than the Kansas City Chiefs did. They gave him a better offer. And he ended up signing with the Chiefs. I want to say the Ravens offered him 10 and he signed for 9, or it was around that. They offered about $1 million more than the Chiefs did. He ended up going with the Chiefs. He wanted to play with Patrick Mahomes. No fault for Juju, but that worked out. Juju played very well for the Chiefs. They ended up winning the Super Bowl. Juju was a big part of that. Was he a superstar? No, but he's a pretty darn good wide receiver for them. And this offseason, the thought was, right, the Ravens need to fix 2 positions. It's cornerback and wide receiver. And I'm not going to lie, this may be the worst free agency for wide receivers I've ever seen. And I've said that. I've said that. I'm already coughing. I said that at the start of the offseason. And I was like, I'm not like heavily pursuing any of these players, right? Allen Lazard is the biggest name. The way that the Ravens would be able to bring in a wide receiver would be if they traded for one. And there's players on the trade market, which is a completely separate story from signing. Guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Cooks, Adam Thielen got cut, but maybe the Ravens could have tried to trade for him, all those types of things, right? There are players to trade for. But in terms of signing players, Darius Slay was by far the best option for the Ravens. By far. In terms of high-end players, right? If you want to get somebody to be a number 2 cornerback for the next few years alongside Marlon Humphrey, including players in-house, Marcus Peters, Darius Slay is a much better player. And the Ravens deal that they offered him, based on the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles matched the offer, so I'm just going to go over what the Eagles gave him, but the Eagles matched what the Ravens did. A 3-year, $42 million contract. $24.5 million guaranteed, $10.1 million signing bonus. The cap hits over this contract is 11 million, 11.8, 10.9, and 14.4. That is a very good contract. Then you'll look at it, there's about five, you can restructure for about $5 million each of those years. Like, it's really frustrating because in the midst of all these Lamar Jackson contract talks, so many people tell me and tell other Ravens fans and tell, the media, and they talk about it. And I just see so many people criticizing the way that the Ravens do their contracts and that they're not smart. They're never able to get money. They're always at the max and they can never make more money. And that is blatantly not true. Because the Ravens consistently make contract offers to players that are able to be restructured. They go into every offseason, like every good team does, with limited cap space, and then they go, okay, let's make some money and free up some players. But they build their team through the draft. That is how every good NFL team builds their team. Look at every good team in the NFL, right? Every good team, right? Let's look at the Super Bowl last year. Chiefs, where they get their quarterback drafted, where they get their best player, which I think is maybe Travis Kelce, drafted. Where they get Chris Jones, drafted. Oh, so those are all their best players. Okay. Let's see who was in the Super Bowl against them. The Philadelphia Eagles, where did they get their best players? Jalen Hurts, drafted. Dallas Goedert, drafted. Miles Sanders, drafted. They did trade for their wide receiver 1 in A.J. Brown, but wide receiver 2, drafted. Right? Their defense. Some free agent signings and free agency pickups. I'm not saying teams don't bring in nobody, but the core of that team was drafted. What led that team was the offensive line, and that team was drafted. Kelce was drafted, and all of those guys on the offensive line were basically all drafted by the Eagles, and that was the forefront of that team was offensive and defensive line. That's what they were built out of, and that's why they were winning. And those are the players that they drafted, guys like Fletcher Cox, right? The 49ers. Did they add players like Christian McCaffrey? Yeah. But where did everybody else come from? Purdy, drafted. Kittle, drafted. Debo, Ayuk, drafted. Bosa, drafted. The best teams in the NFL, they don't spend crazy money every year. That's what the bad teams do. That's why every year you look at, and I don't want to hate on what the Jets are doing right now because, I think they're doing it kind of well. They've been drafting well. But, in the past where it's like, oh, man, this team went out and they signed all these players. That rarely works out. The teams that are consistently good are the teams that draft well. The Ravens are a team that drafts well, and they're a team that wants to build through the draft. And going after Darius Slay, I think would have been a very good move, and I'm very happy that they made that offer. I was very excited for them to bring him in because the reports were saying, like, man, it does look like Darius Slay's coming to Baltimore. Because Marlon was tweeting about it. Darius Slay was talking to Marlon about it, or he retweeted or quoted something by Marlon about it. And that was right after he got released. And it was like, okay, this is happening. But the criticism of Eric DeCosta that I see the most is not drafting. It's negotiations and keeping players. And I think it sucks to lose a player, but it sucks more to overpay a player and to cripple your team just to keep somebody, right? They may be very good, but letting someone go just because they're and even though they're very good, is something that all teams have to do. And you have to make that decision because you only get a couple of superstars, right? You only get a couple of stars. You only get a couple of good players. The majority is all your drafted pieces, and who do you want to keep? And you have to make those decisions with all of these positions. And the Ravens clearly, I think, have done a very good job at that. And the way they negotiate their contracts is they do this, restructurability. They're one of the best teams in the NFL at doing it. And they're the team that does the best when it comes to comp picks. And that's how they build their team. And the criticism that I see so often is just like the Ravens are so bad at contract negotiations. They never signed anybody. And it's like, well, they don't sign a lot of players because they don't want to get stuck into bad contracts. because they have been stuck in bad contracts. And when you realize how bad a bad contract is, no matter how good the player, it sucks. Ronnie Stanley, I think, is the most recent bad contract for the Ravens, even though when you signed it, it wasn't bad, but they get hurt and then you get screwed. And anytime a guy has 2 season-ending injuries, you're going to get screwed out of that contract. That's not looking back and be like, oh man, they shouldn't have done that. But when you look at this Lamar Jackson negotiation, this is why they're hesitant, is because they're trying to build something where they have the flexibility because they know how to move the cap and they know how to restructure and rework all of these deals. And the Darius Slay contract shows that because they offered him a big deal, $14 million a year over 3 years, but it wasn't something that was going to be crazy crippling, right? You know, he would be 34 at the end of that contract, but at the same time, it's like, okay, it wasn't a crazy long deal. It wasn't fully guaranteed. You would be able to have an out after year 2. It's just like, to all the Ravens fans that are hating on Eric DeCosta for being bad with money. Again, there's things to criticize DeCosta about. I fully believe that. He hasn't been the best at drafting. There have been some misses in the draft class and some players that he could have taken and some players that haven't worked out. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying he's the greatest GM of all time. But the things that he's good at are the things that would have made the Ravens competitive for 25 years. Managing money, making sure that you don't overpay players, because the one times the Ravens did that, they were bad for 5 years. And that was with Flacco. But he is aggressive. That's what this video is about. Eric DeCosta is being aggressive this offseason. Excuse me. Pursuing Darius Slay. Now pursuing Odell Beckham Jr. And it's interesting. Here's the thing that's really interesting to me. We offered Darius Slay a 3-year, $14 million a year contract, right? Odell Beckham Jr. reportedly wants a $15 million deal. I'm curious. Maybe the Ravens are willing to do that on a 1-year deal. They were willing to do it for Darius Slay for 3 years. Maybe they do Odell for 1. It kind of shows me like this. He is being aggressive. Just because we haven't signed anybody doesn't mean he's just, waiting is in the water, just not doing anything, just chilling out, relaxing. Instead, what he's doing is he's being strategic and he's locating, okay, where do we want to be smart? Right? You can't take a deep shot every play. You got to set him up with the play action. You got to set him up with the run. And then you wait and you go, okay, there's Darius Slay, let's go. And they went and they got him. And unfortunately, he gave the Eagles a chance to offer, and they did. And he ended up signing with them because he is a loyal person. I don't fault Darius Slay for going back to the team that he was with recently because they matched. But I think they're being aggressive with Odell. And the Lamar Jackson, I think, is putting a negative look on Eric DeCosta. But we've seen that he's aggressive. But we've also seen that he's not dumb. And we don't know the specifics of Lamar Jackson's contract negotiations. I'm not trying to talk about that in this video. But don't think that Eric DeCosta isn't willing to be aggressive in signing Lamar. Because I think he's willing to be aggressive in all sense of being a GM. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Subscribe for Daily Ravens content, and I'll see all of you again tomorrow.